Finding world-class engineering talent can feel like trying to find a needle in the haystack, a very expensive haystack. The demand is high and the competition is fierce. And your budget is, well, it's a startup budget. It is what it is.
To the challenge we talked about in our ideation episode, right? Because you have this great idea, but you have to build it out to prove it, but you don't want to spend too much, right? Or maybe you want to test out something new. You already have a product, but you want to kind of innovate a little bit and you're too busy. Your engineering team, they can't be pulled away, right? So offshoring's always been popular. But today, Rachel, let's talk nearshoring.
Love it. Welcome to the Managed Chaos podcast, where we give you the startup business rundown in less time than it takes for you to get to work. I'm Rachel Anderson.
And I'm Katrina Purcell.
And today we are getting into the nuts and bolts of nearshoring. Katrina, when did you first find out about nearshoring? Because I feel like the term not necessarily so widely used, even if the actual action is used a lot.
That's a great question. I think I started hearing about it slightly pre-pandemic. A little bit pre-pandemic, I would say. But more so, I would say when global conflicts started happening and there was destabilization in areas like the Ukraine and places where historically folks had found engineering talent. It became much more of a conversation.
Yeah, so interesting. I worked many years ago now, definitely pre-COVID, with a company that had just been starting their hiring practices for engineers specifically in other countries. And it was the first time that I kind of thought about almost like centralizing areas of expertise in other places. And it was just super fascinating to me to then see on the global scale, almost like a industry of job type that would blossom. So for people that maybe aren't as familiar with nearshoring, let's back up for a second.
Yeah, let's start there.
What exactly is it? What is nearshoring, and why should a startup founder really consider it over maybe traditional hiring, as a little bit of a foreshadow?
Yeah, so it's really about picking talent in it or creating a team in a country or a region that is close to you, that has similar time zone to you. So part of the reason I learned about it pre-pandemic is because previously the company I was working with had really focused on hiring in India. The problem was the area of India where they were hiring was super oversaturated. And so they were having trouble finding talent that they needed. And so they started to expand their efforts elsewhere. And they thought, what are the problems that we want to solve for here? It's not just finding the talent, but right now, when we have to talk to teams that are in a completely different time zone, and if we have engineering talent on the West Coast, when you start to think about how much time is lost trying to talk to an engineering team in India, it makes a lot more sense to start to think about Latin America. So finding talent that is actually in your time zone or as close to your time zone as they could be. So even East to West Coast is a much better time zone split. I think that's a key advantage. That was a problem that they were trying to solve. The other thing is cost efficiency, right? So the thought of going offshore is always some semblance of saving cost, right? And I think nearshoring actually offers pretty significant labor cost cuts compared to the US market, especially if you're hiring in what are becoming new and up and coming tech hubs. You have access to a wider pool of talent. And as you mentioned, I think there are certain cities, certain areas, especially around technical universities, that are becoming well known for specific types of talent. So whether that's data engineering, ML modeling, there's ways, app development is a big one as well. There are ways to find people who have very specialized skills in a much easier way. Also, generally, there's a little bit more cultural similarity when you go to nearshoring. The teams potentially have more awareness, especially if your product is a B2C product. They might actually be consumers of your product. It might make collaboration a bit easier if they also share a language and, they're able to kind of communicate a little bit better with your team.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's interesting because, the company I mentioned, we kind of had Ukrainian and Romanian people that started working with us kind of in that like super broad but general
Mhm.
like area and so much talent. But it's interesting because I work with a lot of companies in the US and a lot of leaders think about like, oh, well, being in a different country just completely it's inefficient. Like I
Mhm.
managed people that were in India once. That was a great example. And it's like a 12-hour time zone
Yes.
change. And so if I say something at night or in the middle of the day where I'm like, hey, we need to update this thing, and then they send me back something the next day for them and me, and then something needs to be tweaked. Like it's these days of conversations because of that
Exactly.
exchange, right? Versus some people are like, no, no, I don't even want to deal with that. They have to be here because I value time
Mhm.
over the cost, right? It's like
Right.
the time cost equation. So it is really interesting. And I feel like my observation is that we need startup leaders to slow down a little bit so that they can consider that time cost equation, not out of what am I comfortable with or what seems quote unquote most convenient, but
Mhm.
truly considering what that looks like because most jobs don't need to be so urgent, right? If you
Yes.
prioritize urgency, then of course you're going to be local. But if you're prioritizing efficiency or even cost in order to scale with low numbers, then maybe nearshoring. So I think your examples are really good for startup leaders to slow down a little bit and really consider what your goal is.
Exactly. We've mentioned that on a bunch of episodes, right? That
Mhm.
understanding what your end goal is and making your decisions based off of that is so important.
Yeah.
So, your goal shouldn't just be I want to hire an engineering team somewhere else. Why are you doing it? What is
Yes.
what is the end result you're looking for?
Yeah. So this is a great follow-up question then, because if you're trying to get clear on the goals, what are maybe some of the most common mistakes that startups or startup leaders will then make when they try to start building that nearshore team so that they can make sure that they're aligning to goals?
So, the first one I've seen is not treating them how you would a full-time hire and evaluating for culture fit. So, if you're hiring purely based on technical skills, if they don't fit your team culture, if they don't fit the values and you're not assessing them on those values, you might actually be hurting your progress instead of helping it. And so that you should still treat them and treat the hiring process as you would with someone you're bringing into your organization as a full-time employee. Um, on that, in that vein, treating them as a vendor and not as part of your team. So
Hmm.
viewing them as sort of this external thing as opposed to an integrated part of the company. When you integrate a nearshore team into your team and you allow them into all hands meetings, when you create virtual social events, when you have team building exercises, they can make better decisions because they better understand why they're being given what they're being given and they understand the big picture as opposed to just the small project that they're working on. The other thing is ignoring communication barriers. So even if they do speak the same language, it doesn't mean that all the nuances, all the slang, all of the terminology, all of the abbreviations are going to immediately make sense. So you really need clear communication protocols. This comes back to something we've talked about
Hmm.
pretty often is defining how do you communicate? Do you use Slack? Do you use Teams? Do you use another way of communicating? Do you prefer emails? Another piece is micromanagement. We do this to everyone regardless of where they sit generally, and honestly, I think that is actually behind the return to office movement as well, but it's really trying to understand the outcomes and the results, not the minute by minute of what they're doing. Right? Give them the goals, give them the outcomes you're looking for and let them achieve it. It really creates more camaraderie and it also helps that team feel that they're delivering for the greater good of the company as opposed to just cogs in a wheel that are doing something that's kind of on the side.
Yeah, I think those are really good. I'm gonna add one more that I've observed, which is that I think leaders ignore sometimes significant cultural differences. And what I mean in this specific context is like just because you're the hiring person and country doesn't mean that your expectations of how people engage with you or each other will translate over. to a
Yes.
different country's expectations and cultures. And that was really obvious for me at one point when I was engaging with a certain country abroad where they just don't really say no to the hiring person, and they like, it's just culturally you don't do it. You just always say yes, I can do it. Like, yes, it's possible. Yes, I'm on it. Yes, yes. And I had to basically accidentally stumble into putting someone in charge of the project in that team who just happened to be in America, but from that same country. And
And
it fit
understood.
and
Yeah.
understood, and it really fixed everything. And so that was the moment for me. Not that you should do that. I don't think that's necessarily it, but it really highlighted that I didn't understand a fundamental thing about their culture and how they
Yes.
operate that was significant for what I needed to know so that I could help adjust and bridge that so that that was really successful.
That's so important because understanding the culture is not just understanding they have different holidays, right?
Right.
Or understanding that they have, different weekends, right? Maybe they have
Yes.
Friday, Saturday off is much more fundamental than that. Understanding how do they respect leadership? Are
Yes.
they going to push back, right? Or how do they when they disagree? Do they disagree in person or is it going to be more of a written thing? Those cultural fundamentals are so much more important than just understanding, oh, wait a minute, they're going to be off on this holiday.
Yes, 100%. So, okay, so since this feels like we've taken a really practical turn, like what are other practical first steps that if a founder was like, okay, I'm going to slow down, I'm going to make goals, I'm going to try this, what are the first steps a founder should take to really begin building a nearshore engineering
So
team?
I love that we've come back to practical because I do feel
Always
like
practical.
we always try to make sure that, when you're listening to the episodes, you could really kind of create your checklist and do it. So number one would really be defining your needs, right? So what are the roles? What are the specific technical skills you're looking to add onto your team? And what is the project scope that you need to fill? So are you building an app and you need a web developer, you need an app developer, you need someone who's worked with Apple before because Apple is very difficult sometimes to get into the app store. Do you need someone who can build you ETL pipelines or someone who's very familiar with AI? And then choose the model that's going to work for you. So there are different options here. And I think sometimes people feel that it's a bit daunting to try and find the talent on your own. So, maybe locating a region and then putting out job descriptions, but then you have to sort
Mhm.
of handle the challenges of international taxes and how can you employ someone in another country and what does that look like? So there are opportunities to actually have firms that will handle the hiring and the logistics to help you out. And so generally their overhead costs are not that large, especially considering the fact that you're getting vetted talent and someone
Mm.
who is in the region that can actually work with them and ensure that they are getting everything that they need. So there are pros and cons to both. It really kind of depends on what you're looking for.
Mm.
Also, key research hubs, right? So identify, as you mentioned, cities, countries that are known for very specific types of tech talent. Also, thinking about your time zone. So what is the
Mhm.
desired time zone where you want them? So Latin America, while it would work for the US, probably wouldn't work that well for EU-based startups. They might be looking to places like South Africa or Eastern Europe, right? So that there's more time
Mhm.
zone alignment. The budget, always a fun one. So what is the cost difference in different scenarios? Thinking through setting up, obviously you need a little bit of slack in your budget for any kind of things that come up unexpectedly. Do you need an entity in the region? If you're hiring on your own, what does that look like? Do you need any translation of legal documents? What could that cost? And then I would advise starting small. So don't try and immediately build a 20-person team overnight. There are nearshore companies that can actually do that for you, but start with one or two key hires, right? To test the process, build trust with the provider that you're going to use, and really start to test it out. Test out what you have as communication protocols, right? Make sure that it actually resolves issues that you're having or actually creates the outcomes that you're looking for.
That's great. That's really great. Okay, so to recap, nearshoring is a powerful way, if you use it right, to really access talent, top talent, while managing your costs and kind of doing that like the ratio kind of observation that we talked about earlier. And we really want to avoid these common mistakes by treating your team as a core part of the company, and start with really that clear plan, small pilot. And if you're looking to scale your engineering team, I think we would both probably challenge you to look beyond just your backyard and at least consider what that looks like from a management, scale, talent, cost perspective. And then finally, research one or two nearshore locations and see what's out there. Like, knowledge is power, right?
Exactly, Rachel. I think especially in New York, right? That talent is going to be expensive, even right out of school. We are also extremely happy to announce our partnership with Pavel, where they are able to source talent for you across multiple markets to find the best suited and most cost-effective solutions for your business. So they handle all of the confusing parts of hiring a nearshore team, and they would be happy to help.
Yeah, I love it. I love that we have good, strong partners that we can offer up to people that are curious. But with that, this is today's episode of the Managed Chaos podcast. I hope that you were able to get lots of juicy tidbits out of that, even some really practical endings. But as always, we would love if you would subscribe to the Managed Chaos podcast on your preferred podcasting platform, whether that's YouTube, definitely YouTube, because we're really trying to increase our subscriber numbers there so that we can offer you more and more great content. Please comment and let us know what topics you would like for us to cover. We will see them, and you never know, they might just appear. But in the meantime, we will see you on the next episode of the Managed Chaos podcast.
Outsourcing your US tech talent shouldn't be hard. With Pobble.io, we deliver high-quality teams on demand and provide huge cost savings to your business. Try it now at Pobble.io. Mention the amazing guys at Managed Chaos when you email us and get a free market data report. Email contact@pobble.io.